Namaskar, Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. I have the privilege with me of sitting with Abhijit Chavda sahab, who will talk to us about geopolitics. And you guys remember the last time, I think about a month and a half ago, we did a session.
Probably, yeah.
And you guys know we guys have conversation, baatein karte hain, and we just talk about what's happening in the world and try and make sense of it. So, sabse pehle, I'm going to ask you, this India-China sudden. To be honest, I watch China very closely, and I was surprised. One fine day, मैं जा रहा हूँ यार, see you, bye bye. And the next day is like, hey, Modi साहब, कैसे हो? I was pretty surprised. What do you make out of this and Xi Jinping's position in China?
So I'm sure this was brewing for quite some time. This must have been worked upon for years, like 4 or 5 years in the past, and we are seeing the fruits of that now. And to some extent, I am not really very surprised, because I had actually tweeted this a few days before this was announced, I don't know, a couple of weeks before, that the Americans are going to end up doing the impossible and unthinkable, and they're going to push India and China into the same camp. And that's exactly what's happened. So what we are seeing is that the US is completely upending the geopolitical apple cart in the whole world right now. A few years ago, 2003 it was, that they completely changed the balance of power in the West Asia region by taking Iraq out completely as an independent sovereign nation. And now they're trying to do all kinds of stuff in our region, the Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific region. India is facing the heat a lot ever since Biden came to power, ever since the Democrats came to power, and they have been going after India in a variety of ways, and this has actually accelerated a lot after the 2022 special military operation that Putin launched in Ukraine. So India is facing the heat from the US. The US is being extremely unfriendly. It's not just the US that's doing this. All of its little allies and vassals, the Five Eyes nations, etc., and more, are piling the pressure on India. You will see, we know what's happening vis-a-vis Canada. The UK is also very much pro-Canada in this matter. Australia also harbors a significant anti-India Khalistani kind of population and so on. And you have all these think tanks and mouthpieces, media mouthpieces, that put out these hit pieces on India, including nations like France, Germany, even Japan has been doing that.
Asia Nikki, surprising.
Yeah, Nikkei. So we are facing this heat from all sides. All of the US allied nations are doing that, and we know what's happening with China. I mean, it started during the Trump administration, the trade and tariff war that they launched on China, and Biden has actually taken it to a different level, to a whole different, higher level. So China is facing the heat. They've essentially cut off China's access to a large extent to the entire Western market with these trade barriers, tariff barriers. So China needs a big market to export its stuff to. Otherwise, what does it do? And the only logical large market that exists is right next to China's, right next door for China, which is India. So China is facing the heat. India is facing the heat. Yes, we have our issues, not of our creation. China has created the issues, but it makes sense for us to have some kind of détente and look for ways to cooperate and work together. So I think that's what's happening. So I'm not really surprised.
Temporary, permanent?
I think we'll have to take it one day at a time. Okay, we'll have to be very, very cautious. The Chinese are not our friends, but there's a very significant difference when it comes to the Chinese approach and the US approach. The US, both nations, I would say, would ideally like to see India get balkanized, disintegrate into smaller political entities, smaller states. It would work great for China and for the US as well. However, the US and China differ in the sense that China does not seek to destroy Hinduism and Indian civilization.
Correct.
The US does. And from that perspective, China is less of a threat for us. So we know that they are not our friends. The Chinese are no one's friends. So we'll have to take it very pragmatically, very realistically, one day at a time. We'll have to do confidence building measures. We'll have to verify every single thing that the Chinese are doing. Don't trust them. Keep verifying, and that's how you respect your opponent.
Yeah.
So that's how I think we need to approach this matter going forward.
So I call the alliance something called the Sino-Wahhabi Leftist Alliance. The Sino, the Wahhabi, Pakistan, and that entire gang, and the leftists which are there in USA, who basically sell their mothers for, just like a Pakistani, sell their mothers for anything. And that's something that we see happening. Now, when I talk about the Sino-Wahhabi Leftist Alliance, the first biggest name that comes to my mind is Jastinder Singh Bhindranwale. That's something that I want to start calling him. Now, when you see that guy and the way that he's taken up stuff right now, which is basically the US shooting a gun through his shoulder.
Yes.
They don't have the courage to do it themselves. They're trying to do a little pannu punnu and all that nonsense, but they know they can only pull it that far. It won't go beyond that. But Canada has been thrown into the fire. How do you see this whole the K gang issue playing out in Canada? Because India today, as a matter of fact, has given what, 7 people's names to Canada with new dossiers, and as a matter of fact, we arrested a chap called Baljit Singh from. Incidentally, by the way, I don't know how these Khalistanis decide to transit through India.
Okay.
So through UAE, he was transiting, and we caught him.
Okay.
So I don't know how that happens. Leaving that apart, but what do you think is the game there, and how are we playing it?
So you're absolutely right. The Americans are shooting off the shoulders of Canada. I don't believe it for 1 second that Justin Trudeau is acting on his own. He would need the US approval to do this. Now, technically, Canada is a sovereign nation, etc. But we know how things really work in the world. Technically, it's a sovereign nation. Realistically, it's a non-sovereign nation. It's a non-entity. It's a geopolitical lightweight, no hard power of its own. If the US were not there to defend Canada, the Canadians would be invaded by God knows how many Vikings and Arabs and whatnot. So the deal is that Canada is a US proxy. All these nations, the Five Eyes nations, the EU nations, the NATO nations, Japan, South Korea are US proxies, US vassals, US client states, whatever you want to call it, even Pakistan, even Bangladesh now. So the US doesn't want, see, it's all about perception management. That we are not all entirely anti-India. It's a whole bunch of nations that are seeing eye to eye with us. And they all believe that India is a repressive state and a state that allegedly does, oppresses the Khalistanis or whatever. Human rights violations. The backsliding of democracy, fascism, Hindutva, hardline stuff, all that nonsense. So they want to make it appear like it's a whole bunch of like-minded nations, the civilized world, the Western world, that all of them, they see India in this manner, because India actually is a very backward nation. So that's the kind of impression they want to create. Now, when it comes to this Khalistan issue, there is no Khalistan issue in India. Whatever may or may not exist is actually being actively, the flames, whatever are there, they're very small, but those are being fanned by outside forces, right? And the real fortress of the Khalistani movement is Canada, it's the US, it's the UK, and it's Australia. So it's the Anglosphere. New Zealand is too small to be significant in that, but it's all these nations. And I hear there are some EU nations that also harbor some Khalistan.
Italy and
there you have it. Those are also
one more.
So those are also states that are captured by the US. They have no option but to do whatever the Americans tell them. So that's what's happening. So the Americans, the deep state, whatever we want to call it, they are keeping these artificial astroturf movements alive on their territories, on the territories they control, and they want to use it as a pressure point, as leverage to apply pressure on India whenever required. It's not just the Khalistani movement, there's the entire Dravidian movement also. There is the alleged oppression of what the so-called Dalits, etc. And they're trying to fan these divisions, create these divisions, create atrocity literature, academic literature that kind of goes in the direction. So it's a multi-pronged approach that they are employing against us, and we are really feeling the heat. And all of this is going to affect us in some way or the other. So we are feeling the heat, the government is feeling the heat, and the same thing is happening with China in a variety of different ways. So it makes sense, whatnot, all kinds of stuff. So it makes sense for these two nations to come together in some kind of modus vivendi. We're not friends, we're not allies, we're not...
common interests?
Common interests, yes, and common enemies, you could say.
But America doesn't even spare its allies. It's not that UK is the best friend and stuff like that. What I remember... 3 months ago, Telegraph, no, not the Telegraph, the New York Times actually wrote an article saying Keir Starmer is the new dictator in town.
Okay, that's a pressure tactic,
right?
To make him behave.
And why? Because he's got a maximum majority, and the guy's, okay, leftist nationalistic is what I would call him. Guys, maaf karna, don't bloody kill me in that, because I'll get comments saying, what is leftist nationalistic? It's just a term, leftist, yes, but he's kind of being nationalistic in that front. But he doesn't spare his own allies. Look what he did to Germany.
I'll tell you what. Going back a few decades, okay, there used to be something called the Sinn Féin, the Irish national, whatever, nationalist army, whatever they call themselves, and the era of the Troubles. Northern Ireland was a sore point for the UK, and obviously Ireland is a UK occupied territory, English occupied territory. They deserve independence. I would say that Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland should merge and become an independent nation. Northern Ireland is still under British occupation. So there was this independence movement, this freedom struggle that was going on for decades in the 20th century, right? And what happens is that the moment Tony Blair comes to power in the UK, this movement ends spontaneously, apparently. So clearly, we know very well that Tony Blair was a US stooge. up until Margaret Thatcher, the UK had a very strongly independent foreign policy despite having been relegated to the status of a second-rate world power. So Margaret Thatcher was a very strong-willed lady, good or bad, it's for history to judge, not our business. But she was strongly opposed to Irish independence and all that, and she was once almost assassinated with a mortar shell in her hotel room. So as long as you had a leader in power in the UK who was pursuing an independent foreign policy, there was this independence movement happening in Ireland. The moment a US stooge comes to power, the independence movement disintegrates or just spontaneously ceases to exist. So it tells you that there are no coincidences in geopolitics and international relations. Clearly, this was something that was being funded and financed and aided and abetted probably by the US, allegedly, right? The same way you have this, so the Irish independence movement was like a proxy of the US. And we know that there are so many Irish origin people in the US who have deep roots back home in Ireland, especially in the northeast of the country, Massachusetts or that entire region, and New York, etc. So clearly this was a pressure tactic on the UK in the moment. So they don't spare their allies either. There are so many other examples. They sold F-15s or whatever it was to the Australians. The Australians discovered that they could not target whatever, they could not select targets.
The submarines right now?
Submarines, that's another saga, the UK-US thing. Yeah.
The day for yesterday, they refused.
What happened? I'm not aware of that.
No, this is beautiful.
Okay.
So the Australians wanted to buy those $65 billion worth 30-year contract with France. They wanted to buy these huge submarines,
they were armed
diesel electric and all that.
Yes.
They were arm twisted. They cancelled that contract. Americans said, we will give you the submarines.
Yes.
Then that thing changed to the British who will make the submarines in Australia. That was stopped. It came back to the Americans making the submarines. And now the Americans say, no, we're not giving you the submarines. You give us a base and we'll base our submarines there.
So there you have it. So that's how they treat their own blood and flesh and blood, their own allies.
Anglo-Saxons.
Anglo-Saxons, yeah. So that's the way it is. So the deal with the US is that it's an empire. Okay, it's an empire. You can call it by whatever name it is, but it's actually an empire, and an empire has no friends.
Colonialistic empire.
It's absolutely neocolonialism. So they only have assets that they use, disposable assets, and that's how they treat every nation. And for them, India is also a pawn on the geopolitical chessboard, one that with limited utility to be used as cannon fodder against China. And hopefully, in the best possible scenario for the US, India, China go to war and both disintegrate, are blown to bits, or India is blown to bits and China is significantly mortally wounded, and then the Americans can peacefully deal with Russia on their own.
Since you're talking about American allies, I wanted to actually talk about Ukraine, but I think the bigger ally is Israel, and the way that Israel has been treated. We'll take Ukraine in the next question. The way that Israelis have been treated. I mean, I'm sure you're aware of that. This recent leak that has happened from the Pentagon, which has been done by an American-Iranian woman,
Ariane Tabtabai.
I mean, mouthful, huh? But the funny thing that you realize in this, that the Israelis are not being led to fight the war that they want to, and this is something that the Israelis kind of complain about every war that they fought. We've been allowed to fight the war, but we were never allowed to finish the war. Now, what do you think is the American plan in this game? I mean, keep this damn thing alive? Is that what Israel was actually created for? I mean, it was created for the Jewish people. We support that. Fair enough. Good guys. All that great. But is that what the Americans back Israel for today?
It's a very complicated relationship, the US-Israel relationship. On the one hand, the US is the ultimate defender and supporter of the Israelis, of the Israeli nation. On the other hand, there are issues like what you mentioned. So the question is, what's the long-term end game for Israel?
What is it?
I mean, how do you establish peace in this region? You have created what is essentially an artificial nation, resettled the Jews in this region, which was an ancestral homeland 2000 years ago, no doubt about it. But this is in the present day scenario an artificial nation that you created.
Rockefeller is on record saying, my family created Israel. So
there you have it. So they created a nation. It is situated in the middle of a region that is entirely hostile to it. Every nation, religiously, culturally, etc., is hostile to Israel. The ones that are the immediate neighbors. I'm not talking about the Saudis and the UAE and all that, but the immediate neighbors. So the question is, what is the long-term solution to this problem? I mean, they would like to see Israel erased off the map of the earth, from the river to the sea. The neighbors. Israel obviously wants to keep on existing for the foreseeable future, longest term foreseeable future, and the neighbors are against the very idea and existence of Israel. So what's the solution? There's no solution. I don't see any reconciliation, any solution. What do you do about this? Now, the Israelis, obviously, they responded. They had to the October 7th thing, and the situation in Gaza, as a result, has happened. The pager attacks and all that was kind of a masterstroke, incredible, to some extent comedic, but to some extent extremely impressive.
Impressive, but not effective. Would you agree?
Well, how many will you kill? How many of them will you kill?
They're still firing 300
They're still firing 300 missiles a day. Then you have the Iran angle as well. Iran is not a pushover by any means. There was a recent earthquake also, which is kind of interesting in a region where you typically don't have seismic activity.
Earthquake here and Israel at the same time, at the same point, and at the same latitude. Funny.
Yeah. So I probably think that Iran may be the 10th nuclear power, probably by now. I'm sure they have enough fissile material for a bunch of warheads, maybe 10, 15 warheads, so I'm sure. So that is also there. Now this leak, this Pentagon leak that happened, I believe that, look, it's the Wikipedia page for that lady, Aryan Tabtabai. It says that there have been allegations against her in the past, and that she has been in contact with the Iranian National Guards, Revolutionary Guards and all that. So, and still, she was still within the Pentagon. So, knowing a bit about the tradecraft and all that, I would say she must actually be a double agent. She appears to be working for Iran, but she's actually perhaps spying for Iran. And she may also have been used in this particular instance. Probably she's now been burned as an agent. And she's been used to perhaps put a kind of a dampener on the Israeli plans for retaliation against Iran. Something happened last night. It was kind of a handshake retaliation. Nothing really happened, but the Israelis can now say that, see, we responded. So I think the Americans are trying to contain the situation to a certain extent. They want to keep the region on the boil because that suits them. That allows them to deploy significant amounts of military hardware in the region and create bases. But they also want to contain the situation. They don't want the whole thing to end up in a conflagration. So I think they are managing Israel, they're managing Iran, etc. If they want, they can totally strike at Iran if they want, the Americans.
We know about Bangladesh, we've spoken about Bangladesh. Let's kind of leave that because the Americans don't seem to be highly impressed with what's happening there if you look at Bloomberg and all that stuff which is coming out. But I want to speak about Pakistan. And you said bases. I see Balochistan kind of going in that direction because when you look at a map, the only place that Americans kind of have good access to the ocean, good access to Afghanistan, Iran, Central Asia. They can tickle the Russians in their belly a little bit. They can screw around with India, that whole thing. And plus, if you look at, apart from Saudi Arabia, which is covered on this side by Oman and Yemen and all that stuff, so they don't have the direct access into the Arabian Sea. To me, to contain this situation, I'm going to take a leaf from you, you mentioned a base. Balochistan seems to be the ideal place. I would pick up a base in Balochistan if somebody asked me. Seems to be the ideal place. Maharang Baloch right now was stopped while she was getting honored by Time magazine. So you can see that, I won't call the girl, she's a fighter, she's a smart fighter. So I refrain from calling her a stooge, but she's being used, right? She's not built up in that sense that the other guys are built up, the deep state stooges sort of a thing. Do you think the Americans are actually moving forward in this particular area? Because we see that the day that the Chinese, there was an announcement that came from the Pakistanis saying that we are going to, the Chinese and Pakistani said that, we'll put this as the major international base of China. Boom.
Yeah, the Goya base, you mean? Yeah. So the way I see it is, I see Pakistan as right now being in the US camp. So we had Imran Khan, who was a very strongly pro-China leader. And he unfortunately happened to be in Russia the day the special military operation was announced. That was a very bad look for him. And a few weeks later, he is ousted in a coup. So there was a coup in Pakistan, and a very strongly pro-US regime comes to power. Shehbaz Sharif, whatever his name is, that guy, the brother. So he's a very strongly pro-US guy. And so Pakistan is once again now a US ally, the US client state. They do maintain reasonably friendly relations with China, but they are very much a US creature right now. So the US has one big asset in Pakistan, which they can use as needed. They could open a base in Balochistan if they want to. They could do that. The US also has Afghanistan, by the way. Okay, the Taliban receive a stipend, a weekly stipend of I don't know how many, $87 million in paper money, in cash.
Two places. One plane lands in Kandahar, gives the money, takes off. lands in Kabul, gives money, takes off.
Indeed, and
Two factions.
and we know that the Chinese wanted to route their one belt, one road thing through Afghanistan, and it has completely vanished. There's not even any talk of it anymore. So the Chinese understand that the Taliban are a US ally, okay, despite having their whatever ideology or whatever, but they are on the US payroll. So the US has two assets in the region, and the calculation seems to be that in an ideal scenario for the US, India is a counterweight to China. Okay, if India is a US can be made into US ally,
allegedly.
Then just to keep India in its place, you have a counterweight to India, which is Pakistan. And just to keep the Pakistanis in check, you have a Taliban. I think that's the game they're playing. And Pakistan is also a great place to spy on the Iranians from. Yeah. So that's what it is. And the Americans now have a new East Pakistan regime, which is in their favor. They may be getting that island very soon, that St. Martin's Island. They are trying to create a new Christian nation, cookie land for Christ in our Far East. So there's a whole lot of stuff the Americans are doing in this region. They have their fingers all over the place in this region.
Do you think they're trying to mess up the world before they leave as the so-called world leader?
Well, generally when an empire is in decline, it lashes out, it thrashes out, it tries to destroy everything. I don't see the US as an empire in decline. Their society, morally, culturally, etc., is in deep decline. We can see that. It's morally abhorrent, the kind of stuff that's going on in the US. We'll not comment about that. As a military power, the US, I believe, is at the peak of its military strength. It has more than 700, more than 750 bases worldwide, military bases worldwide.
830, sorry.
Okay, 830 now?
Including the lily pads.
Okay.
So lily pads are these mini bases which they want to make in that St. Martin thing.
Okay, so that sort of thing. Yeah. So let's say they have more than 800 military bases worldwide. They can intervene militarily anywhere on the globe at, let's say, 60 minutes notice. They can.
Yeah, and they can bring the wrath of God on that.
They can flatten nations. They can entirely annihilate nations. They have that sort of military.
Manpower wise, but
yeah. The arms of rods of God or whatever you want to call it. Air power is there.
Oh.
Tremendous air power.
Tremendous. Absolutely.
So the US is at the peak of its military power. I don't think the US has ever been this strong militarily. So I don't think they're trying to. These are the dying throes of an empire, the throes of a dying empire. I think they're trying to significantly reshape the world. According to their vision, maybe they want to make it a unipolar world, or they don't want multipolarity to emerge. They just want it to be a bipolar world otherwise.
To keep everybody fighting so that nothing emerges.
Yeah, so they don't want the emergence of let's say middle powers or new great powers like India, potentially even France, for example. France always has these aspirations.
Maverick.
Yeah, so the Americans have been obviously at work on France also, the AU-KUS deal and all that. So they don't want any of that to emerge. And obviously we know that India is a growing economy. If we keep on growing at the rate we are, by 2040 horizon, we're going to be the next China. And that's the emergence of a new Thucydides trap. That thing has been flogged to death, the Thucydides trap idea, vis-a-vis the US and China.
It does work.
Yeah, but now you will have the emergence of a new power, India, which will surpass China eventually, and that will be a new threat for the US. So let's go to work on India. Let's create all kinds of. We already have divisions and fissures in society that were created by the British. Let's exacerbate those. Let's work on those. Let's do industrial scale mass conversions. Let's create instability in the northeast. Let's create a new Assad state in Bangladesh, and so on. So they're essentially encircling India. Nepal also is a battleground for the US and China. We have seemed to have lost influence there. So that's the scenario overall. So I don't see the US as a declining power. It's a morally declining society for sure, but as an imperial power, it's tremendously strong. Right
How do you think does their economy support it, or they'll just keep doing this rubbish that they're doing?
Look, their economy and one of the pillars of their global hegemony is obviously the US dollar. And now there could be challenges to the US dollar. BRICS is emerging as a significant challenge to the US
trade
dollar.
in local currencies, they hate it. And the other day, by the way, Vedant Patel, he says any challenger to the SWIFT
is a challenger to democracy
and national security. I'm like, what? This guy is. But in any case, he said it.
Yeah. So they will certainly not be happy at all if there is a significant challenge to the hegemony of the US dollar. They'll throw a tremendous tantrum when that happens.
As a matter of fact, I've been asking this question, and a lot of people just say, de-dollarization and tuck, it's gone. The guy has 6,000 nuclear weapons.
They have power position all over the world.
He's got more Air Force in the Arabian Sea than our Indian Air Force.
The US Navy has a bigger Air Force than any other Air Force in the world.
Combined,
US Navy has its own
India, China, and Russia put together, they've got an Air Force there.
Yeah.
Why would they just roll over and die? It doesn't make sense to me. So Vedant Patel put it out.
Yeah, so I don't see the US rolling over in time. Even if there's a challenge to the hegemony of the US dollar, the United States controls most of the trade routes, most of the supply chains. They control most of the choke points in the world. They have bases everywhere. So they will still have access to material, to whatever they want. They will just have to do it, get it done in a different way, perhaps. It will be a challenge for them. It will be more difficult than in the past, but they control everything, so they will still get what they want. They may do it in a more blatantly open, hegemonic manner or whatever, but they'll still get things done. So it's going to be really difficult for any emerging power to displace the US or even think of replacing the US as the global hegemon. It's going to be a long run for them.
You spoke about the BRICS. Let's get into this conference. A lot of expectations, but what do you think was the outcome?
The outcome was, first of all, the very visible quasi-reconciliation between India and China. Finally, the two leaders sat down, had a reasonably warm interaction. Reasonably warm.
As much as you can reason with Xi Jinping.
Yeah. So there was that. That's one takeaway from that. Yeah. The other thing was that Armenia and Azerbaijan sat down together and had a conversation.
They were laughing with each other.
That was like, wow. Yeah. So that was that. I don't know what it is. No, I understand the deep roots of the country, the ethnic, religious, whatnot. Goes back to the mess the Ottoman Empire left behind.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there is that.
The wrong lines that were drawn and just...
Yeah, that's what it does. And obviously the other takeaway is that Putin is by no means isolated. I mean, Gutierrez came there and gave a speech, the UN Secretary General. So this is now a genuine emerging coalition of nations, and it's attracting a lot of other nations that are not even members or associates of BRICS. And a lot of nations have expressed interest in signing up for the new payment system and all that. So, the world, to a large extent, is tired of being pushed around by the one global hegemon. And the world would want alternatives. I mean, imagine you live in a country where you have only one taxi service. Aren't you tired? I mean, they can dictate whatever they want to you. So it's always good to have multiple taxi services, or at least 2 or 3. If you just have one big airline in your nation, then they can decide whatever rules they want. But if they have competitors who are coming up with innovative things, then obviously they will also have to adapt.
It's easier to do it.
Yeah. So that's what we are seeing geopolitically. People are seeing the emergence of options for them.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting that Putin came out initially itself before the conference started, and he said that, listen, this whole BRICS currency and all that is nonsense, not going to happen. We'll be happy that we see it. We'll be happy if we see it during our lifetime. That was interesting. And then he later on said, "Ki sahab, we transfer ka kar rahe hain, we'll figure it out. It's under work, but it's going to happen." But the most interesting thing was he put out that currency note. A lot of people have taken that as realistic.
Face value, yeah.
But it was a joke, actually. It's a narrative that they were trying to build.
Yeah.
How do you see Europe as far as Russia and Ukraine is concerned? Because I'm now seeing a lot of ease up on the sanctions. People don't talk about Ukraine anymore. The comedian's t-shirt is now getting loose. What's up?
Ukraine, it's turned into a frozen conflict kind of situation, long war kind of scenario. The Russians are willing to wait as long as it takes for them to achieve their objectives. Their objectives is the denazification, demilitarization of Ukraine, and obviously regime change.
We've forgotten the objectives. It's been 3 years now. We're forgetting the damn objectives.
Yeah, so that was, So they are willing to wait as long as it takes. They are in no hurry, the Russians. And it's clear they're going to prevail in Ukraine. Now, Europe is being ruined by the policies of the EU, etc. We are seeing the shutting down of nuclear reactors. You're seeing we know what happened with Nord Stream. So the European engine, the engine that runs the European economy is essentially Germany and a couple of other powerful nations, economically powerful nations. They are being starved of cheap energy, and when your economy is starved of energy, the economy also itself dies. So Germany had gone into a recession a couple of years ago. Now it's still not doing well, and overall Europe is declining as an economic power. It's not doing well at all, and then you have all these issues with migration, illegal immigration, and all that, social conflict, social strife. So I see Europe as a declining region overall. It's never been an independent sovereign entity.
Whole of Europe or Central and Western Europe?
Look, I don't
minus France.
So France is a whole different case. But when you talk about the EU and NATO, most of these nations aren't doing well.
How about Eastern Europe? Poland?
Poland is the new front line. The West would like to envisage Poland as the new front line. Whenever Ukraine crumbles, Ukraine falls, Poland is going to be the next front line. So they are building up the Polish military. And Poland is being touted as the next military superpower in Europe. So they are demilitarizing Germany to a large extent, and they are militarizing Poland. So if I don't believe it will happen. I don't think Putin is crazy and he'll just keep on ruling westwards. But in the extremely unlikely scenario that happens, then Poland will be the next front line. So Poland will do well as long as it is the beneficiary of the Western largesse. And so Eastern Europe overall, well, you know, nations like the former Yugoslav nations and all, they are too small and insignificant to actually, you know, be very significant on the geopolitical stage.
And they've got issues there as well. Kosovo and all that nonsense.
All that is there, yeah. So I don't really see Russia anymore as a European nation. It's an Eastern nation now, from my perspective. Then you have nations like Greece, etc. that, well, in the past 10 years, 15 years, they've not been doing well economically. They've been, kind of not doing well. So overall, I don't see Europe doing well. France, obviously, it has its own ambitions. France has always followed a quasi-independent foreign policy. They've always tried to be as independent as possible from the EU and NATO, despite being a member of NATO. They have their own nuclear deterrent. The British don't. I mean, you will see, technically they have their own nuclear deterrent. But those are mated to the American missiles. And
they can't use it.
Yeah, the big red button is in Washington. It's not in London. So France has colonial positions even now. They have a neo-colonial policy in Africa.
Indian
Ocean region, they have Réunion and whatnot.
A billion people?
Probably, yes. And those are citizens of France, right? Réunion, Mayotte and all that. So there is that going on. So France may perhaps have a divergent path from the rest of Europe if they can manage things well. But overall, I don't see a great future ahead the way things are going for Europe.
We've covered quite a large part of the globe. Towards the end section, I think I want to cover the South China Sea. That's one place that we haven't. But one thing that I see fructifying quite a bit, and as a matter of fact, PM Modi had said that quite a while ago about port-led development. And Adani seems to be the secret weapon. We've got now in the Indian Ocean, or let me just rephrase that, we've got now in the Indo-Pacific more ports than the Chinese have.
Okay. Could you name a few?
Oh, let's start from, let's say, Haifa.
Haifa, yeah.
Right? Kenya, you're picking up ports where there's a stupid protest happening.
They have Dukum as well, right?
Yeah. You got Dukum. And there's a port from S, I forget. There's another port that he's pitching for now.
Okay.
Then you've got Dar es Salaam. Chabahar, Dar es Salaam.
Yeah.
Let's go down. Assumption. You've got that Algiers.
What is that?
Mauritius.
Agalega,
yeah.
Agalega. Okay.
Then you go down to, we've got our own ports which are...
We have our own ports.
Nonsense, just leave that.
The new Andaman port is coming up.
Andaman port.
One, yeah.
Aceh in Indonesia, Sabang region. Singapore, Vietnam. Modi Saab spoke about in Brunei, negotiations are on.
Okay.
Philippines. I mean,
Philippines is kind of a lie now.
Stringing now like that. And you're in talks with Malaysia also. Although Malaysia is entirely he keeps doing this, but they know they need to give it. It'll happen sometime or the other. And to me, Vietnam is most critical. 125 miles from the Chinese mainland.
That's right, yeah.
So when we talk about the South China Sea, the battle is now there. I mean, it's literally, is that one of the reasons that you see that the Chinese saying, oops, our string of pearls has been cut by, it's not no more the necklace of diamonds, but this is like a, I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
It's like a snake, around China. So how do you think this whole port-led development, this game which has been played, has happened in the past 4 years, if you see?
So what I am seeing is that India is finally starting to behave like a great power. No riffraff nation would embark on such a port building scheme.
I forgot Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka, yeah, of course. So India is finally beginning to show some ambition, geopolitical ambition, thinking far into the future, behaving like a great power. We are seeing that. That's a change we have seen only after the advent of Mr. Modi in 2014, and most of these have fructified in the past 5-6 years. So the Chinese will obviously be sitting up and taking note of this, and there's nothing much they can do about it at this point in time. Short of going to war, you cannot target the ports, right?
And these are civilian ports that can potentially be used for
other purposes, let's say. Yeah, so India is doing that, and that's a great response to the Chinese so-called string of pearls. So that totally checkmates that. You have your thing, we have our thing as well. And we have a lot more like-minded nations, friendly nations when it comes to us. Nobody fears us the way they fear China. We are not going to turn up tomorrow morning with a bunch of battleships on your horizon, right? We won't do that. So yeah, and we also have friendly nations in the Gulf region. The UAE is a friendly nation. Saudi Arabia is very friendly with India. We have good relations, reasonably good relations with Iran as well.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't get it when Indians cheer for when Iran gets hit by missile strikes or whatever. I don't get it.
I think Indians are cheering for the Islamists getting hit. It's not Iran. You know, I've thought about this and I've kind of distinguished the two. I've said Iran is made out of two entities. One is the Islamist and second is Iran itself.
For sure.
We don't have a problem with Iran. The problem is with these stupid mullahs that are sitting there.
But even the mullahs don't pose any threat to us.
They don't.
They are actually adversaries of China.
It's just
or Pakistan.
The whole radical Islamization, and you're kind of cheering against that.
I know. Yeah. But I think we should not do that.
But yeah.
There is no need or necessity for us to do that. Even the mullah regime is kind of reasonably friendish towards India.
Reasonably
friendly.
Apart from,
once in a while they put out a stupid tweet.
Yeah, apart from Khomeini, he's kind of. By the way, the back-end conversation by the Iranians, don't take him seriously. He's old and senile. Just let it be.
So I don't understand why Indians are always cheering against Iran. Yeah. We have a reasonably good relationship with Iran.
I don't mind cheer against Hezbollah, Hamas.
That's totally fine. Obviously, we should. I mean, those are terrorist entities. They need to be wiped out. I understand totally. So yeah, that's how I see it. So I think India is doing great. We have we clearly have a far-sighted foreign policy. We are putting the pieces in place that will ensure the long-term viability of supply chains, etc. for us, for trade routes. So it's great. I love it.
Final question is, did China go back because he wanted to hit Taiwan now?
I think it's not really feasible for China to hit Taiwan right now. The Americans are way too strong. I think even if the Chinese, Taiwan, it's right in the Chinese backyard, right? It's right across the pond for them. And yet they can't take Taiwan. The Americans are just way too powerful. That actually tells you, it kind of quantifies the kind of power asymmetry that exists between the US and China. We think of China as this gigantic, extremely large economy, and we think it's a very powerful military. The Americans can wipe the floor with China if they want.
Anytime.
Okay, so the Chinese are no match for the Americans. They are not in a position to take Taiwan. And they will not take the risk of losing so much that they've built over decades for the sake of an island, which anyway, even if they win the island, it will be in ruins. So it doesn't make sense for them to do that. Unless the Chinese leader goes mad, he won't authorize a move on Taiwan.
I think he's gone mad, but they've clipped his wings. The commander of the PLA today, he's the commander of the PLA, but his so-called Muh Bola Bhai, I think he's playing games with Xi Jinping now. And when you saw the body language of Xi Jinping when he met Modi, it was, oh yeah, come please sir, I've been told to meet you and sort this thing out. And he was not very.
He looked slightly unwell to me, Xi Jinping.
He's been like that for a long time. Yeah, I don't think it's unwell. I think it's a lot of.
Okay.
I think it's the Gang of Four back again of Mao. Mao was dead before that happened. I think this guy has gone through it when he's
Gang of Four was around the time of Deng Xiaoping, right?
No, Mao's wife.
Mao's wife was one of the.
Yeah, Mao's third, fourth, fifth wife or whatever it was.
The last one, yeah.
So they all did that. Anyway, Abhijit Saab, it's always a pleasure and honor meeting you. It was lovely to have this podcast. We've been trying to plan it out over the weekends, but it's not happened. But great to actually do this in person. Thank you so much, sir. Jai Bharat.
Jai Bharat.